Good morning, I'm Dr. Valerie Ekway, and I'm the Director of Member Support and Community Justice for the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. Today we will examine the dynamics of intimate partner violence, explore statistical data, and examine actionable steps vital to assisting survivors, thus increasing their safety. So what is intimate partner violence? We know that intimate partner violence is a pattern of abusive and coercive behavior used to dominate or control a current or former intimate partner. Abusive behaviors can include emotional, physical, psychological, financial, and spiritual abuse. Intimate partner violence is also referred to as domestic violence, family violence, interpersonal violence, partner violence, or battering. You will hear these terms used interchangeably. Intimate partner violence is a public health phenomenon in South Carolina that continues to thrive in silence. Historically, women were considered property and men were superior. There were traditional gender roles in place. Males were dominant and females were submissive. Men were allowed to assault their wives without fear of punishment, and there was little legal response to men beating their wives. Society at this time believed that what happens behind closed doors is between a man and his wife. We must consider, how is this still prevalent today? What goes on in this house stays in this house is the new narrative. What is wrong with this type of messaging, and how can we change this narrative? Now let's explore some statistics. South Carolina ranks 5th in the nation for women murdered by men. Over 91% of women were murdered by someone they knew. An estimated 19% of South Carolina women will experience stalking in their lifetime. 28 victims were wives, common law wives, ex-wives, or girlfriends of the perpetrator. And 46 females were murdered by males. According to the Violence Policy Center, out of the 46 victims that were murdered by men in 2015, 23 were white, 22 were black, 1 was Asian or Pacific Islander. African American females were murdered by males at a rate more than twice as high as Caucasian females. And for homicides in which the age of the victim was reported, 8 victims were 65 years of age or older, and the average age of the victim was 43 years old. You can find the full report at the Violence Policy Center's website at www.vpc.org. Women ages 20 to 24 are at the greatest risk of experiencing non-fatal intimate partner violence, which is almost triple the national average. Nearly half of dating college women report experiencing violence and abusive dating behaviors, and 1 in 6 college women were sexually abused in a dating relationship. So there is this transitional time when going away to college, starting a new job, moving away from home, and becoming financially independent from parents. And these patterns of behaviors may have started in teen years and may be escalating and solidifying if there is no proper intervention. Pregnant abused women have an increased risk of intimate partner violence homicide. Homicide is one of the leading causes of injury-related deaths during pregnancy in the first year postpartum. Pregnant abused women tend to report more severe violence compared to non-pregnant abused women. Reproductive coercion may be a part of the abusive relationship, and there is a potential impact of miscarriage and low birth weight babies as well. Dr. Jean King wrote an article titled Domestic Violence Pregnancy: Why are pregnant women more vulnerable to domestic abuse? There is an increase in intimate partner violence during pregnancy because partner abuse is essentially about power and control dynamics. Violence may be a manifestation of domestic violence, but domestic abuse is fundamentally about control. And the perpetrator can't bear to be out of control, and when the perpetrator feels that they are losing their grip, violence will escalate so as to regain that control. Perpetrators of intimate partner violence could be male or female. Women are much more likely than men to be victims of intimate partner violence, but what happens when a man is the victim? Is he believed? There are assumptions of males as perpetrators and females as victims. Are men taken seriously? Are services available for him? And will he have social supports? Let's talk about the stats for a moment. An estimated 14% of men experience at least one act of severe physical violence in their lifetime. Nearly 10% of men experience rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner and reported at least one measured impact. An estimated 46.5% of men experience at least one act of psychological abuse, and gay men were more likely to require medical attention and 16 times more likely to suffer injuries from intimate partner violence than people who do not self-identify as gay. Women experiencing psychological aggression in their lifetime was an estimated 47.1%. This is where males and female experiences are close together. We must be careful not to interpret that as meaning men experience intimate partner violence in almost equal numbers or equal ways to women. Remember, dynamics of male-female relationship and male privilege. Women tend to experience more and have more devastating impacts. So we're not saying it as a gender-neutral crime or half of intimate partner violence services and info should be about men. Also, social structures and norms that sustain domestic violence harm both men and women. Services and supports are needed for male victims, but intimate partner violence is not a gender-neutral crime. Male perpetrators may act like they are the victim and show signs of violence done to them, like scratch marks. The female victim may be trying to protect herself at that time. There are traditional gender roles on who can be a victim and who can be a perpetrator. What are some gaps or barriers that the LGBTQ individuals might experience in terms of violence prevention and education? What intersecting oppressions might place the LGBTQ population at a higher risk of intimate partner violence and sexual violence, and or create other barriers when seeking services? If a female patient comes into the doctor's office with another woman and they are screening for violence within the home, would the doctor ask the other woman to step out? Would she assume that the two women in a relationship are on equal footing and neither would be abusing the other? Other forms of sexual violence includes forced penetration, sexual coercion, unwanted sexual contact, and non-contact and unwanted sexual experiences. Survivors may be isolated from the family, and the perpetrator may use threats to out the survivor. So in a 2013 needs assessment of the LGBTQ individuals in South Carolina, over 30% had been in a relationship where they were the victim of relationship violence, but only 2% had sought services from a local intimate partner violence program. An estimated 11% experienced physical interpersonal violence in their current dating relationship. Multiple studies indicate that over 50% of transgendered people have experienced sexual violence at some point in their lifetimes. Transgender survivors were 2 times more likely to face threats, intimidation within violent relationships, and nearly 2 times more likely to experience harassment within violent relationships. 22.8% of transgendered and queer gender college students experience intimate partner violence. Firearms, especially handguns, were the weapon most commonly used by males to murder females in 2015. Nationwide, for homicides in which the weapon used could be identified, 55% of female victims were shot and killed with a gun. Of the homicides committed with a gun, 69% were killed with handguns. So it is very important that survivors understand that when there's a handgun in a home and intimate partner violence is being perpetrated, that they could be in grave danger. Next, we will explore the dynamics of intimate partner violence. Maslow hierarchy needs explains how difficult it can be for a survivor to reach true self-actualization and empowerment. So if their lower level needs are not met, it's very difficult to get there. So for example, if a survivor's physiological needs, food, clothing, and shelter, and transportation needs are not met, then it's very difficult to reach safety and security needs. or love and belongingness and self-esteem needs, which means that they truly can't get to self-empowerment if they can't have these lower level needs met. Intimate partner violence can be a traumatic event. Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental health, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So the events is what happened and how often and what was expected. How it is experienced is how an individual assigns meaning to the event, which will impact whether the event is more or less traumatic. And the effects is how much physical or psychological effects a person experiences will impact how traumatic it will be. Survivors may be experiencing the same type and severity of abuse, but respond differently. So we must be careful not to make judgments about how survivors respond. We must operate from a trauma-informed lens. It's a shift from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. Intimate partner violence is about power and control dynamics within an intimate relationship. Batterers' use of violence is a choice that they make every time they perpetrate violence. Batterers continue to use violence because they are often not held accountable by society or intimate partner violence service providers, and they often repeat their pattern of abuse and control in past and future intimate relationships. Intimate partner violence is not caused by the victim's behavior, batterer's illness, or by genetics. And although witnessing intimate partner violence as a child may contribute to the propensity to batter as an adult, it is not a cause. Many children who grow up in abusive homes do not batter as adults. Intimate partner violence is not caused by the batterer's culture, anger, the use of alcohol or drugs, financial struggles, or by stress. Violence is a choice the batterer makes every time they perpetrate. Intimate partner violence is about power and control dynamics within an intimate relationship. Perpetrators use emotional abuse, isolation, children, male privilege, economic abuse, coercion, threats, and intimidation to control their intimate partner. Disclosing sexual violence can be extremely difficult for survivors. Sexually coercive and violent tactics are commonly used by perpetrators. For many reasons, survivors may be hesitant to talk about their sexual violence. Perpetrators of intimate partner violence feel entitled to sex and often degrade their partner sexually. Survivors are forced to change their behavior in response to the abuse. Perpetrators' rules often change, leaving the survivor to feel helpless. Survivors have no control over the batterer's choice and can do nothing to stop or prevent the violence. Survivors are often terrorized by the abuse and violence and may employ strategies for survival and coping. Survivors' alcohol or drug use is often started or encouraged by their perpetrator. Perpetrators will often use the survivor's substance use abuse to diminish their credibility. Survivor may be using substances to cope with the trauma they are experiencing. And the abuse may not be the only cause for the survivor's substance abuse, but will likely be a large contributing factor. Survivors of intimate partner violence face additional challenges and barriers to self-reporting abuse. There's the fear of retaliation by the perpetrator, society's perpetuation and normalization of gender-based violence, custody laws and practices place survivors and children in further danger, misconceptions in society, which include victim blaming, shame and internalized feelings of guilt, a lack of available and appropriate resources such as transitional and permanent housing and transportation, a lack of jobs and community or criminal justice demand for perpetrators' accountability. Survivors are often asked, why don't you just leave? Survivors may be safer knowing where the perpetrator is in an effort to protect themselves and their families. Perpetrators' manipulation and violence often escalates when the survivor attempts to leave. The potential for domestic violence, homicide increases when the survivor is attempting to leave. So remember, survivors are the best expert at assessing their own safety. So what about the survivor's behavior? Survivors may be angry, survivors may be emotional, and their decisions may not make sense to us. And what we're seeing is a difficult response to a horrific situation. Intersectionality asks the question, what else may be impacting the survivor? Each survivor has multiple identities shaped by history and social relations. Different combination of these identities produce their own oppressions. So let's say a survivor was Latina, transgendered, and from a lower socioeconomical status. All of these forms of oppressions intersects their identity, so when this survivor is seeking services, they are coming in with all of this impacting their lives. Intersectionality asks the question, what else may be impacting the lived experience of these survivors? Intersectionality is about seeing survivors as a whole person and considering all of their intersecting identities and needs. Survivors' response to services may differ because of those impacting needs. Here are some other intersections to consider. If they live in a rural area, housing, religion, debt, alcohol and drugs, unresponsive systems, if they had a criminal history or a lack of job experience and DSS was involved. Listed here are other potential vulnerabilities to consider: homelessness, HIV and AIDS, mental illness, prior trauma, military service, substance use, or their cultural background. Consider how any of these factors may impact someone's experience with intimate partner violence or their access to comprehensive and appropriate services. What happens if you don't consider these aspects of their experience? And how can you collaborate to make sure you're providing comprehensive care? Leaving may not always be the best option for survivors because the risks to leave and stay are the same. So they may have physical violence, risks to children, financial losses, threats to family and friends, there's legal risk, and life-generated risk. Survivors of intimate partner violence may recant or refuse to prosecute because of fear of the perpetrator's reaction, harm to others, worrying about being disbelieved, public knowledge, showing injuries, more concern for the perpetrator's well-being than their own, relationship investment, distrust of formal systems, and loss of finances. So it's very important to remain focused on the perpetrator and hold them accountable. The only way to keep children safe is to keep the non-offending parent safe. There are programs available for perpetrators of intimate partner violence. There's the Batterer's Intervention Program. Perpetrators attend the Batterer's Intervention Program most often as part of a legal system response to their crime. Batterer's Intervention Programs play an integral role in education, rehabilitation, and coordinated community response to intimate partner violence. Survivor safety and offender accountability remain a primary goal of this program. Victim blaming can be quite harmful. Victim blaming marginalizes the survivors, making it more difficult to come forward and self-report. It makes survivors feel unsafe and reinforces what the perpetrator may have told the survivor. It's your fault, or you asked for it. Perpetrators are not held accountable for their actions, and victim blaming reinforces biases and stereotypical attitudes, which further puts the survivor at risk for repeat victimization. It is vital that we challenge victim blaming statements. Do not agree with the perpetrator's excuse for why they perpetrated violence. Let survivors know that it is not their fault. Do not allow the perpetrator to blame the survivor, alcohol, or drugs for their behavior. Reframe victim blaming questions or statements, and always hold the perpetrator accountable for their actions. We must believe the survivor. This quote by Darlene Ormond sums up victim blaming. People may not realize the damage that they are doing by placing the blame on the victim, but that doesn't lessen the damage that they cause by doing it. Remember, impact trumps intention. So here are our final thoughts. Survivors may feel that it is safest to stay in a relationship. Remember, they're the expert at their lived experience. Physical violence may not be their primary concern. The most dangerous time for survivors and children is when attempting to leave. The best way to protect children is to protect and support the non-abusive parent. We need to address victim blaming and judgmental statements and make appropriate referrals. Never make a decision on behalf of a survivor because, again, they're the expert at their lives. We need to be supportive and listen and display empathy, not sympathy. Thank you.